Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel. And today, with the Olympics ceremony having recently just happened over in Tokyo, I wanted to, well, originally I was going to try and set up my own original tag for the Olympics, and I don't know why I thought that nobody else would have ever done this before. And I did a quick search after I'd already created some prompts and was like, oh, okay, so yeah, that has been created. But a really interesting tag, and I love these prompts and they're way better than the ones I had in mind, so let's go with this. And so the original was by The Secret Stacks, who I'm now new to, so this is all very exciting. I also do wonder for a sort of a tag like this that's kind of seasonal, whether every 4 years now The Secret Stacks is just going to get a little kind of sort of jump start of people kind of coming in and seeing it. So I thought I'd have a little go at this, and this is all quite exciting. So let's go with the first prompt, the opening ceremony. Now, this is all about a book that you thought had an incredible opening, and the book that I have to choose for this, and I realise I've got the book is somewhere else in the room, but I've got the dust jacket here, which is the bit I was going to try and show, which is The Promise by Damon Galgut, which just has one of the most incredible openings of a book I've read recently. It's a really gut-wrenching and hard-hitting book, and the beginning part all starts with this character learning that his mother is dead, but he refuses to believe it. And so for the first few pages, all of these introductory parts all reference something that's happened, you know, the death of this mother, but refuses to acknowledge that it's actually happened. So it'll be phrases like, and I'm paraphrasing, when what didn't happen happened, for example. And I just thought it was such a clever idea for a beginning of a book, and I just thought it was so powerful. And in some ways it reminds me a little bit of Camus' The Plague. I think it's The Plague, where it just sort of just talks about mother, you know, mother being dead, kind of all those sort of, yeah, I think it's The Plague or The Outsider. It's a Camus book. Anyway, and I think a really strong opening like that to a book can just make such a big difference. I also think The Infinite Country by Patricia Engels has a really great start as well, of just sort of this young girl trying to escape a nunnery, which is all kinds of wonderful. So yeah, I'll go with that. Next up, there is the prompt, The Games. What is your favourite fictional competition? And I mean, I say favourite here in very loose terms and very broad brushstrokes, so bear with me. But the games of the Hunger Games, and I, you know, I'm not like woo, love all that murder, but more actually, I just think it's so interestingly realised, because you know, people may have various issues with the book or whatever, but I think Suzanne Collins does a really great job here of creating a very, both sort of very out there kind of idea for why these people are constantly fighting, but also manages to kind of bring in a real sense of brutality, where the characters start in such a kind of terrifying world, and the more we learn about the world, the more terrifying that is. And you know, I get that she's not the first to ever come up with this. You know, the film Battle Royale also kind of, you know, covers that ground. But I really liked how it was kind of set up, and how it's constantly just used to sort of be a sort of measuring stick to kind of realise the hopelessness of some of the groups in society, and particularly groups who are even further down the pecking order. So I thought that was really interestingly done. Next up is the original. So the modern games are based on the original Greek competition. What is your favourite book based on a classic? And there are quite a few that I really love, but one that was kind of coming to mind was Angela Carter and her set of short stories. I've got Burning Your Boats here, but what I'm sort of more specifically referencing, I guess, is The Bloody Chamber, which takes lots of old myths and fairy tales. I'm kind of using classic here quite broadly in that sense, not necessarily Latin or Greek, but these old sort of fairy tales, and reimagines them in kind of quite feminist, sex positive, queer kind of ways. And I mean, I love Angela Carter. I could read her describe the most ordinary of objects and be in love with it, just because her writing style is so beautiful and florid and passionate. And so I'd have to say that for this one. Next up is The Eternal Flame. So what is one ship that you won't let die, even after the books made it clear it was never going to happen? And I think the most sort of recent example I can think of for this was the kind of romance or sort of love story within The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous book anyway. But I think what was just so gorgeous is just watching this relationship unfold under quite bizarre circumstances, with these two women working in a hospital, sort of more specifically, I believe, a maternity ward, during a really tricky time during a plague. Relatable. And just watching as this sort of can never really happen, and it's all sort of trapped over this sort of period of about 3 days. It's so claustrophobic and brilliant, and I really wanted it to be a real thing, and it's not really a spoiler in some ways, although I've tried keeping it as light as possible, but it never kind of quite, you always get a kind of sense throughout the book, I think, that it's never really going to be possible. So it's really interesting and really, really beautifully done. And I still think about that book from time to time. It's a really gorgeous book. Yeah, I missed that book. I need to reread it. It's great. Anyway, next up, Gymnastics. What's a book that had so many twists and turns it left your head spinning in a good way? So I've spoken about this book a fair bit recently, but Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. A few of the other books I could think of that had twists and turns were not necessarily twists and turns I enjoyed, and this prompt is really sort of trying to push you towards ones where the twists and turns happen in quite a good way. And for me, Piranesi achieves that, because there is a real sense sort of about halfway through the book where you're not quite sure what you know is real, or what the character knows is real, and who's kind of right. And you're sort of you are almost a character in the book, kind of judging and kind of disproving and disagreeing with the main character. And so the twists and turns for that are quite bizarre in some ways, because in some ways everything becomes clear, and in other ways it just does not become clear in the slightest. And I think that's what's so beautiful and powerful and brilliant about Piranesi, and why I just think this book deserves all the love. I just think it's brilliant. It's so good. Prompt number 6, The Controversial Judge. What's a book you have totally different opinions about than most other people? Now, this is quite difficult, because I think I like most things. So in some ways I feel every time I'm like, I don't think I have a particularly savage opinion of a book that everybody else loved. I don't think I have that many of them. There is one book that I will defend a little bit, and that is, oh, now I've forgotten its name. This is great. Bit of context. 2010, the Booker Prize was won by Howard Jacobson for The Finkler Question. Do I think that book should have won? No. However, it's probably, of the winners, particularly recent winners, one of the most sort of savaged and attacked books. And don't get me wrong, I'm still a little bit confused that like it was really like pushed forward and won. But I don't think it's as terrible as people think. That's probably a fairly lame way to answer that question, a fairly sort of redundant way, but I think yeah, I think it gets a lot of hate, and I know a lot of people kind of give it 1 or 2 stars. In fairness, the first 50 or so pages I was like, I can't do this, this is appalling, and then I eased into it and found it quite funny and quite charming and quite warming in some other ways. I still don't think it's a particularly strong winner. And particularly the fact that Damon Galgut's In a Strange Room was in that shortlist also makes me even more annoyed that The Finkler Question won. But I don't think the book is like a 1-star, this should be burned kind of thing, which seems to be the kind of pitchfork reaction on Goodreads from some people. But I still think there's a lot of fun and charm and cleverness to the book. I just don't think it is as strong as it could be. That was a very diplomatic way of putting that, I feel. Ugh. Anyway, prompt number 7, beach volleyball. I've just been hiding this book off camera for the last, all of that prompt. Beach volleyball. Oh no, I'm doing this in completely the wrong order. That's why. So beach volleyball. You'll have to wait and see what's coming for the next prompt. Beach volleyball, what is your favourite fictional duo? And there are quite a few that kind of came to mind, but one that I really loved and just found really quite fun was Arthur and George by Julian Barnes. I love Julian Barnes anyway, and Arthur and George involves Arthur as in Conan Doyle, and a man George who is sort of falsely accused of committing a crime. It's a gorgeous book, really, really funnily told and really brilliantly done. But what I really appreciated about their sort of duo is that there's very almost like odd married couple, but they're not, you know, they sort of really strongly appreciate each other, but also kind of disagree and kind of want to fight each other, but also mostly get on with each other. So it's this really kind of beautiful, almost kind of homo-romantic relationship. Again, I'm going to see homo-romantic in it regardless, but it's a really brilliant little relationship, and I really enjoy it. They're more of like a kind of crime-fighting duo. The other kind of backup one I have for this is The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, and the duo of the two comic book artists at the heart of that book, I just think have this really solid, interesting, really layered and thought-provoking relationship, with one of them being a Jewish man who is worried about who sort of uses Superman in some ways as a sort of a way to fight Nazis and kind of enact that kind of sort of fantasy almost for himself into the world at a time when Hitler is sort of rising to power, and is sort of, you know, and all of that's kind of happening. So really, really interesting, and I kind of loved the way that book plays with things. It's one of my favourite books of all time. I need to reread it. But yeah, they're a great duo as well. Anyway, so coming to the one I meant to do this for, weightlifting. What is the most massive book on your shelf? And this, without a doubt, is Comic Book Tattoo by Tori Amos. Well, it's not by Tori Amos, but it's the lyrics of Tori Amos songs and sort of interpreted into kind of graphic art, kind of comic book style things. So I did this, I kind of cover this a bit in my graphic novels, but this book is huge. So so yeah, you'll have lots of really interesting, this is really hard to hold and describe, but yeah, it'll have lots of really interesting comic book styles. Not always, you know, as effective, I don't think the quality is too consistent overall, but some really interesting interpretations of Tori Amos songs, sometimes really literally, sometimes a bit more abstractly, sometimes just taking one or two words and sort of spinning a whole story from it, sometimes using the story of the song directly, but really, really interesting, and a huge chunker. It's sort of, you know, I mean, it's fairly thick, but it's also, I mean, it is, you know, I think I could pretty much sleep under this as a tent. So, you know, there we go. Prompt 9 is a book that you tore through at world record speed. Now, the first thing that came to my mind is Eric Vuillard's The War of the Poor, but that's also because that book is tiny. So there have been a few other books that I've just loved so much that I read through them really, really quickly. So The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch, I read the majority of it in one night. Maxwell's Demon, which you can kind of see there, by Stephen Hall. Also, I read in one night this really gorgeous experimental book that does lots of really exciting and interesting things, I think. And so I think those were both books that I was not expecting to read that quickly and just devoured, because I just thought they were really, really, really interesting. Next up, Synchronized Swimming. What is a book series that you kept reading even though you didn't have any idea why? And I mean, in some ways, I did have an idea why. I don't read that many series, but a series that I read fairly recently for the booker, hence the reason, was the sort of the trilogy by, I have now forgotten his name. His name was David Lodge. And so the trilogy for these are all kind of university set books, and you know, it's all kind of campus novel sort of style. And the first one I kind of enjoyed and thought was quite fun. And I think it just, for me, it got a bit long and kind of, okay, it's still going and it's quite funny, but it also feels quite dated now. And so I still think they're kind of interesting books. I just think I was kind of at the end being like, yeah, cool, right, did someone die? Okay, cool, we're still going. But yeah, you know, it happens. The things I put myself through for the booker. No, I mean, honestly, they are interesting books and they are quite funny. I think it's just having the whole trilogy back to back, sort of about 900 pages of kind of very like 70s British humour. Very, very specific, very campus-based, very kind of, oh, I'm wittier than you, very kind of slapstick at times. At times it was really charming, and at times I was like, I can't deal with this at all any longer. Please, someone rescue me. And it didn't happen, but I finished them, so there we go me. So the next one is The Tortured Fan. What fictional family, group, nation, or organization do you irrationally root for, no matter how many times they break your heart. And as much as it's tempting to say the Booker Prize at this point, the Booker Prize overall does not break my heart too often. It's fairly consistent. I'm very happy, thank you. But I think sometimes prizes as a whole can be quite an interesting thing, because I think you really build up kind of thinking, yes, I really want this book to be shortlisted or longlisted. This is, this has been my book of the year, and it doesn't, and it feels quite bizarre, and you kind of wonder what the point is. But I think overall, it really, I think it can be really, really powerful. And introduced me to tons and tons of new books. It's me putting it in my name of a channel. So I still think it's kind of great. But, obviously I think those things do have to be held with a pinch of salt. However, I will say there's a family in A Spot of Bother by Mark Haddon, which I remember reading at the time and just sort of being like, this family, like, come on. They're all like not really talking to each other, and they're all being a bit horrible and a bit rough to each other, and ignoring each other, and it all kind of just and they ultimately do love each other, but you're like, come on now, like, tell each other you love them, communicate effectively, please do that. So I would probably say them. And I haven't read that book in a very, very long time, but it's a really interesting. Mark Haddon also wrote Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is well worth checking out, and a really, really interesting book. Anyway, and prompt 12, closing ceremony. What book had an ending that just blew your mind? Now, there are quite a few that I think that blew my mind for kind of plot reasons, but the one I really want to choose is Anne Enright's The Gathering, which won the book. But I remember reading at the time, I read the book ages ago and then reread it last year, and I remember at the time of reading it being told that the ending of the book, that that final sentence was just incredibly powerful. And I remember reading it, like, yeah, cool, whatever, and didn't really sort of take it in. And then I listened to it as an audiobook last year. And there's something about that final bit, because essentially there's been this sort of build throughout the book of this sort of family, and things are kind of a bit dysfunctional, and things aren't necessarily coming together. And this character who is just, like, throughout the book, you can just sort of feel that their life is just sort of waiting to collide with something. It's kind of, something feels unsettled. And then the book does this gorgeous, and I will try and find this line in just a moment, but it does this gorgeous, gorgeous thing. Couldn't quite find that line, but essentially, to paraphrase, she is sort of she's waiting for a ticket, waiting in line for a ticket for for a plane, and she's waiting to basically to return to her life. And it's this sort of big dramatic lead up in some ways of knowing that once she arrives there, everything kind of starts almost, that she's been able to avoid things for long enough in her own life because of everything else that's been going on with her family. And she's been able to avoid that by being away. And she knows that when she returns, she's going to have to deal with everything. And the final line is something like, and I'm doing an Anne Enright massive amounts of injustice here. I'll put it in the bio by the time this video goes up, because I'll be able to find it by then. That basically, like, I sort of waiting for, basically getting on a plane and waiting for my life to collide. And so basically it's this really like violent and beautiful and powerful and kind of heartbreaking final image of her life has just been this sort of plane going round and round, and the moment she kind of collides and crashes back into her life, everything begins, but by everything beginning, everything is destroyed. And it's just gorgeous. It's just such a fantastic ending to what is already an incredibly powerful and moving book. And yeah, I just love it. I think it's so brilliant. Anyway, that leaves the final tag, which is the relay race, and to hand over and to tag people. And so I would really love to tag a few people in this. I feel like I do tag quite a few of the same people, but it's all good. And I'm also overdue on other tags that I'm meant to be doing instead of this one, so apologies. So I would like to tag maybe, let's go with AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, who I owe, I think, 2 tag videos to already, so oops, sorry. I'd also love to tag Ms. Reads a Lot, and Shelf Possessed, who are really, really interesting. And I meant to basically, I think in a previous video I sort of meant to tag them or shout them out and then didn't record the bit where I shouted them out, but just put it in the bio. So here they are properly, but Shelf Possessed is this amazing couple who just have such interesting and entertaining views on books, and I think are well worth checking out. So anyway, that's been me kind of jumping on the bandwagon of somebody else's tag from 4 years ago, or 5 years ago really. Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Please feel free to do it yourself if you are so inclined, and take care. Thank you, and see you all soon. Bye.